Have you ever walked into a room you've known for years, maybe your childhood bedroom, your current apartment, or even just your usual corner of the couch, and felt your entire body soften? Your breathing slows, your shoulders drop, your thoughts feel less scattered. Nothing magical happened, the space didn't change, but something inside you did. For some people, familiar spaces are more than comfortable. They're regulating, they're grounding, they feel like psychological safety. And if you're someone who feels significantly calmer in your own environment compared to new places, crowded environments, or constantly changing surroundings, there is nothing strange about that. There is psychology behind it, there is nervous system science behind it, and there is identity behind it. Let's start with the nervous system. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for potential threats. This isn't dramatic, it's automatic. Every new room, every new layout, every unfamiliar sound requires processing. Your brain asks, what is that sound? Where's the exit? Is this predictable? Am I safe here? This background scanning creates cognitive load, the mental energy required to interpret your surroundings. In familiar spaces, that cognitive load drops dramatically. Your brain already knows where the light switch is, how the door sounds when it closes, what the house smells like, where objects are placed. There is no need for heightened alertness. And when alertness drops, the nervous system shifts from mild vigilance into regulation. This is why familiar spaces often feel calm, not because they're objectively safer, but because they're predictable. Predictability reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty increases stress. This is one of the central principles of environmental psychology, the idea that our physical environment directly influences emotional regulation, stress levels, and mental clarity. Now here's where it gets more interesting. Familiar does not always mean minimal. Some people feel safe in clean, decluttered spaces because reduced visual noise lowers overstimulation. Fewer objects mean fewer visual signals competing for attention. That reduces sensory input. That reduces cognitive overload. This connects directly to why some people feel anxious in messy spaces. Mess increases unpredictability. Unpredictability increases internal tension. Internal tension increases anxiety. For these individuals, decluttering feels like nervous system regulation. But for others, familiar spaces include objects, books stacked in specific corners, old photos, clothes arranged in a certain way. Even mild clutter can feel grounding because it reflects identity continuity. When those objects are removed too quickly, people with lower tolerance for sensory input, bright lights, noise, constant interaction, often rely more heavily on familiar spaces to reset their nervous system. Social environments require facial interpretation, tone analysis, body language reading, self-monitoring. That's cognitive load layered on top of environmental load. When they return home, especially to a familiar layout, their system downshifts. No performance required, no adaptation required, no environmental scanning required. Just regulation. This is why staying at home can feel restorative for some individuals. It's not avoidance, it's recalibration. But here's something important. There's a difference between healthy reliance on familiar spaces and emotional overdependence. Healthy familiarity supports clarity. Overdependence can shrink adaptability. If someone feels extreme distress in new environments, avoids change entirely, or cannot function outside a single safe space, then familiarity shifts from regulation into rigidity. But most people who love familiar spaces are not rigid. They are sensitive to overstimulation. And sensitivity is not weakness, it's neurological variation. Now let's go deeper into identity. Your environment is an extension of your self-concept. Where you place objects, how you arrange furniture, what you keep visible, what you hide, all of it signals who you believe you are. Minimalist psychology is not about empty walls, it's about intentional alignment between space and internal state. If your space reflects your identity, your brain experiences less internal conflict. If your environment contradicts your identity, too chaotic, too sterile, too unfamiliar, your nervous system remains slightly activated.
This is why hotel rooms can feel strange even when they're clean. They lack personal narrative. No memory imprint, no identity markers, no emotional layering. Familiar spaces carry emotional continuity. Continuity creates psychological safety. Now think about why sudden change in your own home can feel unsettling. Rearranged furniture, different lighting, removed objects, even positive changes can create subtle dysregulation because your brain has to rebuild its mental map. Environmental maps are deeply encoded in the hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in memory and spatial orientation. When that map changes, your brain briefly increases alertness. That's why after decluttering, some people feel relief, and others feel exposed. Relief happens when clutter was creating overload. Exposure happens when clutter was acting as comfort. Neither response is wrong, they just reflect different regulation styles. So if you feel safest in familiar spaces, it may be because your nervous system prefers predictability, you process sensory information deeply, you use environment as emotional grounding, your identity is spatially reinforced, and you regulate stress through physical stability. And that's intelligent, not fragile. The modern world is overstimulating. Constant notifications, visual clutter online, social comparison, performance pressure. Your home becomes the counterbalance. Your familiar corner becomes your nervous system's anchor. The real question isn't, why am I like this? The better question is, how can I design my space intentionally to support my regulation? Because familiar doesn't mean stagnant. You can gradually evolve your environment without shocking your nervous system. Small shifts, intentional changes, maintaining core identity anchors. Minimalism, when done psychologically, isn't about removing everything. It's about reducing unnecessary cognitive load while preserving emotional continuity. And that's the balance. If you feel safe in familiar spaces, it means your brain values stability. If you feel anxious in messy spaces, it means your brain values clarity. If you regret decluttering, it means your brain values continuity. These aren't contradictions, they're regulation strategies. Your environment is not separate from your psychology, it is part of it. So instead of forcing yourself to be more adaptable or be less attached, you can begin to understand your nervous system patterns, understand your sensory threshold, understand your emotional anchors, understand your identity mapping. When you do that, your space stops being random furniture. It becomes intentional design. And that's what minimalist psychology is really about. Not aesthetic perfection, but nervous system alignment. Not empty rooms, but internal clarity. And sometimes the safest place you can build is not just inside your walls, but inside your awareness of why those walls matter to you.